I'm going to tell you something. If you two never bother me again in the rest of my life, I ain't giving up that shit. I can't. There's good friends of mine out there fucking shit. Well, he's the boss, you have to do it tough. That's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the money is. The boss for me is that the boss is your boss.
It's my kind of town, Chicago is. My kind of town, Chicago is. My kind of people too. People who smile at you, and each time I roam, Chicago is calling me home. Chicago is why I just grin like a clown. It's my...
Hey, welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. So we're going to get into the Roemer files. And as you guys know, throughout the years, there have been more informants within and outside of the ranks of the mob than really probably a lot of people ever suspected. And for the first time, like I said at the top of the show, it took months to kind of figure this one out, but I think I got it. And it's an informant by the name of Sporting Goods and Romano. Now, some of you might say, what the fuck? But Agent Bill Roemer was really, growing up, you're taught to not like law enforcement and this and that, but he was really probably one of the most fair FBI agents in the history going after organized crime. There will probably be some organized crime guys that'll say, oh, look at him, now he likes the feds. But he just had a way of bending mob guys, not just by being honest with them, but he kept it fair. Don't take photos of the family. Don't, if they're out with the kids, leave them alone. Stuff like that. Things, that they just should do. But he was the one, FBI agent that mob guys knew wasn't bad. He never did anything underhanded. So over his long career, he did more for the FBI in its war against the Mafia than probably any other agent. His honesty, his anti-corruption stance, and his approach to respecting them, he was able to turn even the most hardened street guys into fucking jelly. And while he turned many guys into informants, there were one or two who gave him a lot of deep truths. And his code name was Sporting Goods, and then there was another one named Romano. Now, could it have been Johnny Roselli? And these were the things that I was thinking when I started researching was, could it have been Johnny Roselli? Could it have been Dominic DeBella, Ralph Pierce, or Les Cruz? And you can look up Ralph Pierce or Les Cruz for yourself. But until the other day, I wasn't sure. But after pouring through a massive amount of paperwork and cross-indexing like a fucking wildebeest high on angel dust, I think we've got it. So here's a little background. In 1965, the U.S. President Lyndon Johnson ordered the removal of all devices used by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to listen to organized crime figures after he determined that the eavesdropping violated their civil rights. And the order was particularly devastating to agents in Chicago, where for years the FBI had been monitoring activities and recorded conversations at outfit hangouts through the secret listening wiretaps. The eavesdropping allowed the FBI to track underworld assets and rackets and changes in the hierarchy. And to compensate for the loss of that data, the FBI instituted an informant development program in the hope of nurturing a double agent within the Chicago mob. Roemer led by, Roemer pretty much was the agent that was responsible for a lot of that. And the program proved to be a success and eventually included scores of turncoat mobsters. According to Roemer, who wrote a number of books on the outfit after his retirement from the FBI, the three best informants developed under the program were Richard Kane, a former outfit member gunned down in 1973, and two others who, to this day, are known only by their code names Sporting Goods and Romano. But who in the fuck were Sporting Goods and Romano? And so I poured through a lot of Roemer's books and a lot of paperwork and et cetera, and really his memoir, which I was able to get online and just kind of thumb through. in the biography of Tony Accardo provides a lot of compelling clues. And when you combine that with the declassified FBI reports, it appears the identities of these guys can really be revealed to like a 94% sort of thing here. Closing in on sporting goods, looking at Roemer's books, looking for mentions of sporting goods to build a partial profile helped to identify him a little bit. According to Roemer, Sporting Goods was a street boss who was considered a vital source of information to the FBI for more than 10 years. And his full cooperation begins to have started in 1974, although he was sharing confidential information long before that. In outfit parlance, a street boss, as you know, oversees gambling, bookmaking, and other criminal activities within the territory on behalf of the organization. Some traditional outfit territories were on the south side of Chicago, the north side of the Loop. From what I was able to ascertain from Roemer's description, there was no indication that Sporting Goods himself was actually an inducted member of the organized crime group, which we know as La Cosa Nostra. And Chicago's underworld street bosses were not necessarily mob members or even Italian. This is the one group. That truly didn't rely on induction in their hierarchy. Some non-Italian gangsters like Murray the Camel Humphreys or Gus Alex had influence and power that surpassed many of the made members within the mob. Sporting Goods was able to provide the FBI with names of corrupt politicians and policemen, as well as updates on the activities of mobsters within the outfit. A direct quote from the paperwork was, he kept us informed as to who was in the outfit, what they did, who they did it with, and so forth and so on. According to Roemer, he and Sporting Goods enjoyed a deep friendship and had dinner together every Friday for years. According to his book, Roemer's wife came to like this informant too. She would talk to him on the phone, and they would all, like I said, have dinner together. The relationship carried on for 10 years until Sporting Goods suffered a heart attack and died soon after. In his last days, Sporting Goods offered to give Roemer a large sum of money if he could retire, so he could retire. Their friendship was so close that Roemer recalled his death with sadness years later. The profile of Sporting Goods that emerges from those snippets from the book showed that he was an older man with a lot of ability and a lot of polish to him. He was a tough and successful racketeer, but he was cultivated enough to form a strong bond with Roemer and his wife. Sporting Goods was a street boss of an unknown ethnicity. Roemer is insanely careful not to call him Italian or a mob member, which suggests that he was probably neither one. And this was in contrast to Romano, who is explicitly identified as a Mafia member. Now, Roemer really doesn't provide a timeline for Sporting Goods and his cooperation in order to protect his identity, but we can surmise based on available details. The FBI had no informant significant value in 1965, and Sporting Goods died before Roemer left Chicago in 1978 for another assignment in Tucson, Arizona. So it's already been established for the most part that Sporting Goods cooperated for about 10 years before he died, and this suggests that Sporting Goods began to develop as an informant around 1965, 66, or 67, and died in 76 or 77 before Roemer was transferred to Tucson. Looking at the outfit street bosses that might fit that profile, a couple actually do stand out. Johnny Roselli is one, and he was an important racketeer representing outfit interests on the West Coast, and he was also a made member of the mob. He was a guy that moved between Hollywood and the underworld, and it's possible to imagine Roemer enjoying his company. Nonetheless, he's pretty much eliminated as a suspect since he spent most of his time outside of Chicago and could not have met Roemer regularly for dinner. And his manner of death was completely inconsistent with how Sporting Goods died. As we know, they found him floating in a barrel in Biscayne Bay in 1976. Dominic DeBello was the boss of the north side of Chicago for a short time in the 70s, and he was a rough and tough guy and had a reputation as a fucking vicious killer. And it seems unlikely Roemer and his wife would have actually enjoyed his company, so we can kind of take him off the list. But, so DeBello can be eliminated as a suspect because he died of cancer. The two best fits here are Les Cruz and Ralph Pierce. And those two guys are leading non-Italian members of the Chicago mob. And Roemer's description of Sporting Goods makes it more likely that he wasn't a fully induct member. Les Cruz was a gambler who oversaw outfit rackets in the suburbs north of Chicago known as a Killer Kane. His underworld connections went back to the Al Capone underworld. And he worked actually close with Murray Humphreys and Gus Alex to help fix political judges on behalf of the mob. He died in 1976 at the age of 69. Ralph Pierce was a boss of the South Side of Chicago, a gambler and a bookmaker. He was a close associate of all outfit leaders for decades. Pierce was one of the top Jewish gangsters in Chicago, and he was assigned target of former FBI agent Roemer to bring down, and figured prominently in his memoir. Pierce died in actually 1976 after suffering a heart attack. And based on those two profiles, Pierce is probably a better match than Cruz. But there's really no definitive clues linking sporting goods to either person. Unmasking Romano is another whole thing, because Roemer called him a top-tier gangster who was high up in the rank of the Chicago mob. According to Roemer, Romano was was Cosa Nostra member, but he's actually very vague in the book about his outfit rank. But he insinuates throughout his book that this guy was a captain. So when Dominic DeBella, the captain of the north side of Chicago, died, I wasn't able to ascertain really who the successor became. It suggests that Vince Solano is, you have to look at Vince Solano. And the reason why I say that is because he was in the same position as DeBella was. And it's not to suggest that Romano was on the level of a captain, but he was likely present at the infamous Last Supper meeting in 1976 when Chicago's most important mob members came together to say goodbye to DeBella, who was dying of cancer. And it's important because the name of every gangster at the meeting is known to us. Romano was said to be close to all of the outfit leaders, but he was especially close to Sam Giancana. In fact, Giancana trusted him so completely at the time that he was deposed as a boss of the outfit, he confided to Romano that he was considering defying Tony Accardo and fighting to keep the top spot. Romano began to cooperate in 1967, sometime after Giancana was released from jail after refusing to testify before a grand jury and relocated to Mexico. Like Sporting Goods, Romano was friendly with Roemer and his wife, and to get Romano to open up, Roemer said he took an indirect approach. After drinks and during a meal, Roemer would bring up his area of interest. He would typically state some mob gossip as fact and wait for Romano to correct him and give him the intel that he was after. And by finessing his questioning, Roemer made Romano feel like he wasn't actually informing. And this was a different sort of approach than the straightforward approach that Roemer used with Sporting Goods, who was well aware that his conversations were being reported back to the FBI. Roemer's hoodwinking of Romano caused problems later on after he left Chicago. When the FBI approached Romano to continue work with them, he was horrified to be labeled as an informant and denied that he ever met Roemer. And despite a ton of pressure from the FBI and the Justice Department, Romano refused to continue to cooperate. As a consequence of all of that, Roemer said that he had to suffer the consequences. His life, for all of his intents and purposes, was ruined. And while vague, one possible explanation is that Romano was jailed for refusing to cooperate with grand jury investigations. Roemer doesn't state explicitly when Romano died, but we get sort of an idea by reading between the lines in his autobiography of outfit boss Tony Accardo. So in the book, Roemer writes that he and his wife were both deeply saddened when Romano died, and recently of natural causes. Accardo, the book was published in 1995, and this suggests that Romano died in the early 1990s. And it's significant that Roemer released his memoir in 1989. He revealed that he had 3 high-level informants within the outfit, but would only specifically name Richard Kane and Sporting Goods. He didn't mention Romano by a code name. Roemer only alluded to him when he recalled how his time was taken up by 2 top echelon informants, Sporting Goods and another unnamed informant that was not Richard Kane. Roemer was vague about who those people were. He would go on to say that his unnamed informant had confirmed to him that Vince Solano had replaced Dominic DeBella as the boss of the North Side, and it wasn't until the publication of Accardo that Roemer identified this informant by his codename of Romano and provided more details to help form sort of a profile. And so it naturally leads one to sort of wonder, why did Roemer wait until 1995 to reveal the existence of Romano? Why didn't he reveal his codename in Roemer like he did with Sporting Goods? Could it be that Romano, unlike Sporting Goods, was still alive in 1989 and Roemer feared for his safety? And so the profile that emerges of Romano is that of a high-ranking mob member close to Giancana and the outfit leaders who began to cooperate in the 60s. He was likely present at the Last Supper meeting. He was friendly with Roemer and his wife, suggesting Roemer would have a somewhat positive view of him in his books. Romano may have spent time in jail or faced other adversity around the time Roemer left Chicago in 78 for refusing to cooperate anymore with the FBI, and he likely dies of natural causes in the early 90s. And a few gangsters share some details that might match his profile. Outfit members John Matassa and Chucky English were close to Giancana for years, but both men were well dead before Romano was thought to have died, and neither man was present at the Last Supper meeting. Of all of the mob captains present at the meeting, only Solano and Dominic Butch Blasi were there, who died, and both Solano and Butch Blasi died in the 90s. So we know who Romano is. So when we did the Butch Blasi thing, that's how I knew he was an informant, because Romano was Butch Blasi. Okay, so just keep listening. So Solano, we know, can be discounted since he was a protege of Ross Prio and the former boss of the North Side, and he wasn't close to Giancana, nor was he well connected to the top leadership. And that pretty much is what led me to knowing that Butch Blasi was, in fact, Romano. Now, we knew Butch Blasi was a fucking rat, because remember, we did the Rat Files of starring Butch Blasi. However, I did not know his code name in other transcripts until the other day, so he gave up a lot of shit. As we know, he was Giancana's personal secretary and driver, and before that he did the same thing for Tony Accardo. And while he was not an official captain, he was often recognized by law enforcement and other gangsters as enjoying the same status because of his mob position. Roemer and Butch Blasi were friendly, just like Roemer and Romano. We started off as enemies, arm's length, but we ended up not entirely so, Roemer would say. He often would help Blasi fight a bum rap in court when he thought Blasi was innocent. Whenever I saw Butch thereafter, we were friendly, very friendly. I got to know him as well, very well, as the years went by. Blasi was one of the few gangsters to attend Sam Giancana's funeral. After Giancana was murdered, Blasi spent 18 months at the MCC for refusing to answer questions by a grand jury after he was given an immunity. So that's how we know that he was Romano. Let's see. So this is completely in line with what Roemer implied happened to Romano after he refused to cooperate any further with the FBI, suffered the ire of the Justice Department. So an FBI report from 76 is really the key to confirming the identities of both Sporting Goods and Romano. Written after the murder of Sam Giancana in 75, the report basically is a composite of information collected from 3 highly placed informants associated with Giancana and organized crime in Chicago. The report, which was never meant to ever be made public, is noteworthy because it not only provides information about Giancana, but it also sort of gives us a brief description of the informants themselves, and it seems more likely that these are the same 3 best informants described by Roemer in his books. The report refers to an informant who lived and worked with Giancana through this period in Mexico before he was murdered, gangland style, in December of 73. This is clearly a reference to Richard Kane, whose cooperation with the FBI was recounted in the book Roemer. The second informant in the report is described as one of the top half-dozen leaders of organized crime in Chicago for decades. He was a top echelon and criminal informant until his natural death in July of 76. The near precise date and his high rank in the outfit helps us sort of break it down to who this guy might be. If you look at Les Cruz, he was an outfit leader for years, but he dies in August of 76, a month after the informant. Johnny Roselli it's obviously not him because he was murdered in August of 76. Dominic DeBella dies of cancer in 76, and he really wasn't a top echelon leader. So if we assume that the informant is, this informant is Sporting Goods, we can also discount these 3 men for other reasons described earlier. Pierce, he's really the second informant that really matches Ralph Pierce. The longtime boss of the South Side was one of the most important leaders of the outfit for years. He dies on July 2nd of 76 of a heart attack a few weeks earlier. The former informant isn't identified as a mob member in the report, unlike the other 2 rats, which strongly suggests he was something other than Italian. And when you take this all together, the evidence tends to point to Ralph Pierce as the informant known as Sporting Goods. The third informant referred to in the FBI report is described as a prominent Chicago member who was close to Giancana associate before 66, visited Giancana in Mexico from time to time, who was very close to Giancana and his return from Mexico in 74. He's described as very close to Giancana. So the verb 10 shooters used to refer to him indicates that he is still alive. So Chucky English and Butch Blasi, which were the only two guys that were close to Giancana that way. Those are the only two it could have been. Both men were inducted mob members. Both visited Sam Giancana in Mexico and remained friendly to him up until the end. And both were alive in 76 when this report was actually produced. But if we assume that this last informant was probably Romano, Blasi checks off every single box. And we know that Blasi, in fact, was that informant. But there were other clues. Other clues that Pierce was sporting goods. In rereading William Roemer's books, sort of with a focus, or at least thumbing through the books, thinking towards Ralph Pierce, it reveals more information that could be construed that he was sporting goods. Pierce was assigned to Roemer by his superiors to develop an informant. As a consequence, he got to know them well. Of all the gangsters Roemer encountered, he wrote that Pierce was the one guy I could talk to in the outfit. He had a sense of dignity. He was very personable, very affable. And so if Pierce was in fact sporting goods, it isn't surprising that Pierce is presented somewhat favorably in Roemer's books. Perhaps a story Roemer recounted about sporting goods is meant to convey more than his good nature. Once after learning from Roemer's wife that the family dog was sick and could die, sporting goods secured, without being asked, an experimental drug to help save it. And a seemingly unrelated anecdote, Roemer recounted how Ralph Pierce had gifted Roemer's brother baseball tickets after overhearing he wanted to attend a game. Roemer didn't record any similar incidents of generosity from any other gangsters ever. So was Roemer trying to make a connection between Pierce and sporting goods by way of generous spirit? And if the Jewish Pierce was sporting goods, one seemingly irrelevant detail in Roemer's book might make more sense. In recounting his regular Friday night meals with him, Roemer mentions that he abstained from meat and had the fish, as Catholics were expected to do at the time, while sporting goods always had a steak sandwich. And so was he trying to hint that sporting goods was not Italian or Jewish? Why include that needless fucking tidbit except as an inside joke? And that's sort of what led me down that path. And there were other clues. As far as Blasi being Romano, Blasi had given up Sam Giancana once before. In 63, Giancana revealed to the FBI in the heat of the moment that the entertainer Frank Sinatra was his personal conduit to the Kennedy White House. If he wanted to contact the White House, he went through Frank Sinatra. And this unnecessary disclosure was a massive error in judgment, was subsequently brought to the attention of senior leadership of the outfit by Butch Blasi himself. Blasi betrayed Giancana once. Perhaps he would do it again. In reviewing other FBI reports, in light of the assumption that Blasi is Romano, it is possible to find another clue that tend to show that he might be open to cooperating. In the 64 report, Blasi had a friendly conversation with the FBI and said that he would welcome another meeting, though he was careful to say that I don't know anything about Cosa Nostra. Later in 66, in another FBI encounter, Blasi seemed to be warming up to discussion matters with the FBI. Although he said he wanted to limit it to me and me alone, the FBI report would conclude that Blasi showed a degree of cooperation and that future contacts were contemplated. Romano is thought to have begun to cooperate soon after. When Giancana was murdered, most observers figured Butch Blasi as the killer. Roemer never believed that Blasi killed Giancana, but failed to explain how he knew it wasn't Blasi. And this begs to question, why would Roemer maintain Blasi's innocence despite ample circumstantial evidence to the contrary? And one exception may be is that Blasi was Roemer's informant and that he persuaded Roemer of his innocence. Roemer never made it clear why Ralph Pierce and Butch Blasi began to cooperate, and he revealed no obvious motivation in his books, presumably because any reason would have led to their exposure. But whatever the reasons, Roemer's persistent dogging of mobsters and relentless drive to combat organized crime put him in a position to take advantage of the opportunities when they presented themselves. Roemer's books provide an important firsthand account of the battle between the FBI and organized crime in Chicago, and they provide a very unique insight to the practice of developing double agents while still trying to protect their identities. But with the same still, careful reading and the fortunate opportunity to examine declassified FBI reports from the period, we can finally put to rest the true identity of Romano and Sporting Goods. It just goes to show you that Roemer's books offer a lot of insight. Now, a lot of people have asked me, my favorite mob books, and anything Agent Roemer wrote, I've read, even when we're talking 20 years ago, right? Because there's some insight into certain things. Even the fucking Linda Vecchio book that he wrote, that fucking garbage pail of an agent he wrote some things in his book that I found to be completely interesting. And so it's an interesting viewpoint. And that's why, when we did the show on Butch Blasi, I didn't tell you specifically how I got the information, because I was still trying to figure out for the life of me the other set of paperwork that I had on my desk. I knew Butch Blasi was a fucking rat, but I didn't know specifically if he was Romano, but I knew he was a rat. And so when I went through this second set of paperwork and I started seeing Romano over and over and over again, and I have 2 of Bill Roemer's books, I started thumbing through. I was like, aha, gotcha. So I'm 98% positive it's right, almost 99%. So it just goes to show that, oftentimes you see mob genre people talking about, this rat, who's the worst rat. There have been more rats than you could ever conceive. I mean, we've done the rat files on this show for about a year. I think it's like 20 some fucking episodes. And that's just scratching the surface. It's just scratching the surface. And it just goes to show that the FBI has always known a lot more than even what they're willing to acknowledge. And it makes me wonder, truly, the one thing that makes me wonder, if Appalachian never happened, almost is J. Edgar Hoover's hand going to be forced at that point? Does his hand ever get forced? Because there's a large part of me that believes if that event never takes place, I don't think Bobby Kennedy had enough power in his left toenail to push J. Edgar Hoover around. But after Appalachian, he certainly did. And then it kind of opens up a door to, would J. Edgar Hoover have had Kennedy killed? There's a lot of stuff. Now, if you guys asked me, point blank, if you held a gun to my head and said I had to answer it, do I think the mob killed John F. Kennedy? I would tell you no. Were they complicit? Absolutely. Did they have some sort of involvement down the line? Absolutely. But then if you turn around and ask me, did the mob have Bobby Kennedy killed? I would tell you 100% they did. But Bobby Kennedy was also shot by agents that were standing behind him. Sirhan did not do that. He was standing in front of Bobby. So how on earth can Sirhan shoot Bobby Kennedy in the back when he's standing in front of him? There you go. There you go. And Bobby Kennedy presented a whole bunch of problems. And over the years, everybody's like, oh, why'd Bobby get killed? Well, mainly, I'm going to tell you, his policies, whatever. The fact that he was going after anybody that he thought hurt his brother was the reason why. They absolutely feared that he would find out. You can't let a guy like that be a president because he's going to undig everything. And I'm sure that Lyndon Johnson was shitting his fucking diapers at that point, But it is what it is. All right, that's going to be it for this week. We're going to get out of here. We will see everybody next week. Same bat time.